Hi, Misha here. And in the past I've checked out the A-18 Hornet, and this is kind of an update addendum. 2 new models I picked up from Pete's Collectibles on the Easter sale. They kind of fill holes in my collection. On the left we have an A-18E Super Hornet from the U.S. Navy. Single seater. This is set up primarily as an air-to-air with lots of missiles on her. We've got 11, I counted, plus a targeting pod. On the right, I have one I've actually wanted for a while. This is a U.S. Marine Corps A-18D 2-seat version, set up more in a ground attack role with air-to-surface ordnance and extended range fuel tanks, but still a couple of sidewinders for defense. And these are both from 2009, so they seem like nice little companions. Whereas the U.S. Navy is primarily using the Super Hornet Rhino today, the U.S. Marine Corps is still using the A-18D for its primary attacker. So I thought we'd look at the planes both of these were placed in service. And as you know today, the F-35B and F-35C are starting to replace some F-18 Hornets, although this is still going to be a primary aircraft for America, Australia, Canada, Switzerland, and many others for years, maybe even decades to come. Plus, it's just really cool looking. So yeah, let's just have a little fun. This isn't going to be too deep into the history, just a fun little video. Alright, so my new model here is from Hobby Master, as all of my aircraft usually at least are. It's 1/72 scale diecast. As I said, this is U.S. Marine Corps from 2009. And the Marines adopted the F-18 Hornet in 1983 and first started to take them into service in January of 1984. And they first started to see combat in 1986, Operation El Dorado Canyon. And moreover, the Marines deployed 84 of them in the first Gulf War, taking advantage of their FA ability. Yes, the Hornet is a fighter, but it's also a attack craft, basically a fighter bomber. It was the first navalized aircraft to have multi-function displays, so almost literally at the flip of a switch, you could switch from air fighting mode to ground attack mode, and then the displays would reconfigure accordingly. The FA-18A was originally the single-seat version. The FA-18B was the 2-seat version. Now, in most modern jets, a 2-seater is just a trainer aircraft, but for the Hornet, since it was a ground attacker, the second seat could also be for the weapons system officer. And then in 1987, the A would be replaced by the C and the B by the D, which were just upgraded versions essentially with new radar, new avionics, new electronics, and ability to use more modern weaponry. They would also receive better night fighting capability. They were always all-weather, but in 1989, 1990, they received the ability to work better with night vision goggles. They would also receive upgraded engines in the 90s, and in 1993 they would start using laser designator pods. But yeah, the Marines use these for attack aircraft in the Gulf War, whereas the Navy more or less used them for fighters. The Marines would originally fly them off carriers. Later, they would operate them from bases on the ground. And originally, they replaced a couple of different aircraft. The Marines were still using the A-7 in the 80s. And they were actually still using this old bird, one of my favorites, the A-4 Skyhawk. Heineman's hot rod. And the A-4, the last new one, was delivered to the Marine Corps in 1979, and they had their own version here towards the end, the A-4M, which had 400 rounds total and two 20mm Colt Mark 12 cannon. It had a total of 5 hardpoints and could carry up to about 8,000 to 10,000 pounds of ordnance. It was primarily a ground attack aircraft, but it had limited fighter ability, including using Sidewinder missiles and the aforementioned cannon. Small, svelte, very durable airframe, but, aging by the 1980s. So, as the new Hornets came in to the Marine Corps, the A-4s were retired out mostly for training and whatnot, and then finally officially retired in 1992. During the Gulf War, this bird over here was still being flown, the A-6 Intruder. But she was quickly slated for the boneyard after post-Cold War cutbacks. So when the last A-6 was retired out of the Marine Corps, they too were replaced by the Hornet. Now, on the positive side, the original A-6, it did not have any air-to-air capability. It was strictly an attack bomber. So the FA-18 could operate as a fighter. That's good. On the other hand, the A-6 could carry 18,000 pounds of ordnance. Now, it only had 5 hardpoints, but they often double-racked. Or more. So 18,000 pounds, pretty good. Now, this model here is from its final cruise in the 90s, so good for this video. The Hornet replaced it, and there were some compromises. Now, the Hornet has 9 hardpoints, so a little more flexibility. Has the 2 wingtips, though, which are dedicated just for Sidewinder missiles or equivalent. Under the wings, it has 2 hardpoints each for 4, and then it has 3 hardpoints under the fuselage, although one of those is almost always used for a fuel tank. It could use more modern ordnance compared with the A-6, but it could only carry about 13,500 pounds of ordnance, so quite a bit less than the A-6, although still more than the A-4. But on the other hand, it was a modern aircraft. The A-6 was aging, and it could defend itself, whereas the A-6 really couldn't. On top of that, the Hornet is a relatively fast aircraft for what it is. Can achieve 1.8 Mach, and it can climb up to just around 50,000 feet. It's known for being very durable, reliable, relatively low maintenance, not an especially groundbreaking aircraft in a technical sense, but it made up for it by just being a dependable one, and not super expensive like some others, F-35. And these kind of canted stabilizers in the back gave it a little more maneuverability. It was double-engined, therefore reliability over the ocean was good. So that was a compromise in a few ways. It still had a lot going for it. Now the Navy started to retire out the original FA-18C Hornet, but the Marine Corps still uses it today. The final D model was delivered to the Marine Corps in August of 2000, and after that, the production line would be shut down. So the A-18D, while still in service, is no longer in production, though it is being supported. And again, the Marine Corps isn't the only user still. You have Australia, Switzerland, you have Finland, Canada has their own version. And I just thought this model would be neat. I didn't have a D model. The only two-seater I had was a Super Hornet, the F. So I didn't have a standard two-seater. I had a couple of, I have an A and a C. But a lot of my Hornets are non-American, and I don't have a Marine one till now. I just thought this was an attractive model. It's got the, like I said, the extra fuel tanks. It has air-to-surface munitions with the sidewinders there just for defense. But this is definitely more in a ground attack configuration setup. And yeah, I just brought these other models out to give a little color. This A4M is from Corgi. I've had it for a little while. It's been in a couple of videos, but it's a neat little model. It doesn't have ordnance because this is a 1990 era adversary training one. Other Corgi A4s do have things like the bullpup missiles or tanks or what have you. But yeah, I just wanted a Marine M4, and this was available at Aikens. And this A6 is from Century Wings, and these have been out of production for a while. And this is one I told in the video, it kind of was one of my whale planes, and they've been hard to get. I had to get this one not only on eBay, but I had to order it out of the UK. Luckily, that was before all this COVID stuff got going, so no problems getting it here back then. In fact, it got to me in less than a week, but that would not happen now. But really cool model. I've always liked the Intruder. Hobbymaster does an EA6 Prowler, which is cool too. But I like the good old ground attacker here, and I like that I found a, and I can't remember what year this is from, 95, 96, but it's the final cruise these were on. Could have grabbed an A7, but I thought 2 was enough. It just goes to show you the point that the Hornet, designed as a fighter and attack aircraft, really did replace quite a few aircraft in the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps has kind of always been a little more strapped for cash than other branches. So, at least they did finally get their F-35B, though. So with that said, what about our Navy Hornet? Or rather, Super Hornet? Well, I originally phoned up Pete's Collectibles to get that FA-18D. I'd kind of been eyeing it for a while, but these aren't cheap models, and I already have a few, but between the Easter sale and I'll be honest, just good gun sales, like I've said, all those Remingtons sold, I treated myself a little bit and bought some extra models, including many of those U-boats you saw and many others to come. So, hey, at least some of the money some of you spent with me, I'm kind of buying things to share with you. I don't know. Don't worry, we did lots of boring, responsible adult stuff too, like paid on our house and paid off credit cards, but you have to have a little fun in life. Anyway, my point was, the A-18D Hornet I intended to buy, and very much at the last minute, I decided to pick up this A-18E Super Hornet. I have an 18F Super Hornet, which is the 2-seat version, but it is Australian, which is cool. But I didn't have an American one, and this one was on sale. Pete had a good price on it, and it is American. This is an FA-18 A-18E Super Hornet called a Rhino, both is its nickname and on its radio channel call sign. The reason they do that, they call them Rhinos, is so they know what they're launching for sure. They have the equipment set properly to launch the Super Hornet. And this is from Tomcatters, a group that I like to buy aircraft from. And this is the CAG bird. Pete did have the Santa CAG version, which is the one with the cat wearing the Santa hat. I almost bought it just for fun, but decided to go with the standard. And this one here is in pretty standard air-to-air fleet defense configuration. Now the Marine one over here is from the Bengals, a group that dates back a long way. And the original Hornet is about 56 feet long, has a wingspan of a little over 40 feet. Like I said, it can carry about 13,500 pounds of ordnance, 9 hard points, all that good stuff. So what makes a Super Hornet super? It is, roughly speaking, about 20% bigger, more massive. It's about 60 feet long, has a wingspan of just under 44.5 feet. It has 11 hard points instead of 9. The 2 extras are under the wings. And it can carry a little over 17,500 pounds, so nearly as much as an A6 Intruder. It has more advanced engines that provide more thrust. They're also more fuel efficient. And it carries on board about 33% more fuel. So this means it has more range, more endurance. It's not really any faster. It still has a max speed of Mach 1.8. And it doesn't really have a much higher altitude. It can go a little bit higher than 50,000 feet. But really, it's more the fuel efficiency and the ability to lift more ordnance. Obviously, it will have more modern avionics, electronics, a more modern cockpit. It does have more stealth. Now, this is not a stealth aircraft, far from it, but it's what they consider less visible. For example, the intakes have been angled. And just generally speaking, the Super Hornet has a smaller radar cross-section than the regular Hornet. It has less radar return. They've done their best to kind of hide fans and vents. They use fewer rivets, more seamless construction. Just, this is the 21st century, so whatever you can do. And it's just neat that a technically larger aircraft has a smaller radar signature. This really is an all-new aircraft. It does share a lot of stuff with the Hornet, of course. It too was designed by McDoneel-Douglas. In fact, they proposed an enlarged, more capable Hornet as far back as the 1980s. But really, the body, the chassis, all that is all new. It mostly shares common maintenance practices and whatnot. Also, that uses some of the same avionics as the modern F-18C or D, same ejection seat, has a lot of the same weapons interface equipment, but other things, like I said, the engines and stuff are new. But of course, based on it, you can look at it, it definitely looks like a Hornet. And it has a very neat history, like the U.S. Marine Corps post-Cold War, thus post-First Iraq War. In the 1990s, the Navy was going to go with a navalized version of the F-22, later FA-22 Raptor. But this got shit-canned by the powers that be. Grumman also saw that the orders for the F-14D Tomcat, also known as the Super Tomcat, were cut. This goes back all the way to 1989. Basically, the Navy needed to get a less expensive alternative, and they needed to be able to kind of consolidate what they would later kind of call a neck down approach, where they would, have 4 model of aircraft and retire and replace with 1 or 2. Just having fewer aircraft in service, which on a logistic level saves a lot of money. Again, McDonnell-Douglas proposed what would be the Super Hornet, and finally the Navy bit, getting interested in 92, firm orders were placed in 94, and the prototype would fly in 1995. They were just getting into low-rate production and getting it ready for naval trials when Boeing merged with, i.e. bought out, McDonnell-Douglas in 1997, so by the time of full-rate production, the Super Hornet was a Boeing product. Of course, Boeing would continue to make the A-18C and D for a few more years as well, but it was on the way out. The Super Hornet was on the way in. Trials started in 1999, carrier trials in 2000, and by 2001 it was adopted into service, so just in time to see use in Afghanistan, and then of course the Second Iraq War. And it would replace a number of aircraft in the Navy, just as it had done with the Marine Corps. One was the S3 Viking. Now, by all rights, I should have grabbed my S3B, but the A was closer to hand, so you get the A. But, the Viking was a very good, very multi-role aircraft that was quite venerable. But its time was over, and it got replaced by the Super Hornet. They also replaced a couple of tankers by the Super Hornet, because it could carry up to 5 external fuel tanks, and was able to use the buddy refueling system, which ironically was kind of started with the A4 Skyhawk. It also replaced the remaining A6 intruders in the Navy, which, come to think of it, the A6 I grabbed might have been a Navy. I had to go back and look. Hey, when you're blind, paint jobs and markings are hard to tell. So, But of course, the big one is this guy over here, the Tomcat. My favorite plane, your favorite plane, everyone's favorite plane, the Tomcat. Like I said, this is a D model, and orders were cut short. Now, a lot of the older A's were upgraded, eventually becoming B's. And this was designed as a pure air superiority fighter, much like the F-15 for the ground, but also much like the F-15, which has been morphed into the F-15E Strike Eagle. Once the war on terror got kicking, they updated to the Tomcat to give it a limited ground attack ability. It was never designed for that. It just never was good at it. The D was better than the B, just because it could carry more. But its days were numbered. By 2006, the Navy was pretty much doing an all Hornet fleet, be it FA-18C or the new FA-18E here. Also, around that same time, there was a Block 2 upgrade that Boeing proposed, just updating the avionics, weapons, accessibility, night capabilities, the usual stuff. So an upgrade program, and through 2008, some of the original Super Hornets were updated. And then the Navy would finally retire its FA-18Cs from active duty in 2012, and then officially retire them all by 2018, having a big ceremony in 2019. Meaning today, the Super Hornet is the only one in the Navy, but effectively, by 2009, when this model was done, or 2010, this was the premier fleet air defense fighter, ground attack fighter, so on and so forth. It also replaced multi-roles like the S3, the tankers, and of course the electronic warfare version, the Growler, the A-18G, would replace the old EA6 Prowler too. So up until the time of the F-35, in the case of the Navy C, which was delayed time and time again, they pretty much had an all-Hornet fleet. And so something that really started off as kind of a money-saving, time-saving venture really ended up being a blessing for the Navy, because without this, they could have been in a similar position to the British Royal Navy that retired its Harriers and then was, anticipating the Lightning, and it was delayed, and they were left with nothing. So that's good. And these are still very much in service today, not projected to leave until at least 2030. It takes pretty much the same ordnance as the original, just can carry more of it. And yeah, I did talk about the Super Hornet in my original video, so you can check that out for more. Just for, fun. Around 1,500 original Hornets were made, and about 650 Super Hornets have been made to date. And they're still officially in production. This is definitely a loaded down one. I counted it. There are 11 missiles on this. They're different types. It also has a targeting pod and an external fuel tank, meaning it's taking advantage of all 11 hardpoints with 2 double racks on her. It did also come with 2 more external fuel tanks if you wanted to use those on the wings instead of a set of missiles. But why would you not? Why would you want fuel tanks? Now, the reason I did it, my FA-18F has the 3 fuel tanks set up, as does the D over there, so I thought loading this one down would be fun. I love the little chin hard points on these two. I just think it's a neat look. And a neat model in general. Hobby Master's FA-18 Hornet over here is a good model, but it comes with a pretty wobbly stand that's all plastic, and it comes in their typical blister pack, just the plastic clamshell. Their newer Super Hornets, they actually come in a nice, very protective foam, 2-piece foam box. And while their stand isn't a lot better, it at least does have a metal stem, and the base is a little larger, so it's a little more stable, which is good because it is a much heavier model because of the larger size and more going on. Now, it is worth noting that just this month, Hobby Master released all new stands. If you want to buy them, I think they're like $10-15, that are more like JC Wings style, where they plug into the engines. So that's another option. It almost seems like every Hornet I've ever bought ends up getting knocked over once. So I'm sure these will get their christening sooner or later. I've noticed that the sidewinders on the wingtips are not glued on especially tight. They're even a little, not loose, but kind of wiggly. They use minimal glue. The good news is, if yours falls off, they're extremely easy to put back on because they are slotted and tabbed. So just, tab it back on and a dot of glue. Or heck, if you don't want a sidewinder there, make it look like it's already fired it, you can do that too. Speaking of firing, one other interesting difference is the cannon. Learning their lesson from the F4 Phantom, the FA-18 Hornet always has had a cannon. And remember, it's a ground attacker. The original FA-18 Hornet had an M61A1 Vulcan 20mm cannon with 578 rounds, which is, dates back at least the original M61 all the way to the F-104 Starfighter. The Super Hornet has the newer M61A2 20mm cannon, but because of the new cannon and more advanced, more sensors and stuff inside, it does have a slightly reduced capacity of 412 rounds. So, a minor decrease there, but all things considered, it's not like aircraft are getting into routine dogfights. Just having even a couple hundred rounds on board is more than sufficient. Speaking of on board, one nice thing too, with the new engines, the extra thrust and ability, the Super Hornet can take off and land again with its full ordnance load. A problem that dates back to the F-14 and even before was you could launch them loaded up to the max, but before they could be safely recovered on board the ship, they had to be lightened up, usually jettisoning ordnance in if they didn't use it, which modern missiles and guided bombs are extremely expensive, so economics. And the FA-18 Hornet wasn't as bad as the F-14 on this front, but even when it was loaded down, 13,000 pounds or so, it really couldn't safely land loaded, so it hopefully needed to expend some of its ordnance on its mission. Not as much of a problem for an attack aircraft, because usually they're sent out with a job. They deliver their payload and come back. But for fighter versions, like this one here, that might just be doing a cap, just doing an air patrol, they may not fire a single shot. But of course, then again, they're usually not loaded up all the way. But either way, it's one of those neat little just tidbits I thought I would include. Yeah, I guess I'm incapable of doing short videos, but during these COVID times, I think that's okay, right? Yeah, picked these both up. I'm very happy with both. This one's really the surpriser for me. I think it might become my favorite Hornet. I just love all the ordnance on board and the targeting pod. And it definitely looks like a modern fighter aircraft. Very much the worthy successor to this guy over here. I do like my F-14s though. Guess I have 4 of them now. I've got an A, an A+, and a B, and this of course Super Tomcat, the D here. And I do have one from the Tomcatters, so matches this. And I'm sure I've got another Bengal's plane or two if I look in my marine planes. But I like this one. I was hoping it had a few more bomb options. It didn't really come with extra ordnance, just kind of as you see it. But these are a little cheaper. They're about $20 cheaper than the Supers. At least the Supers, they do come with a few different loadout options if you want, so little extra value. And of course, as with all Hobby Master, gear up or down, open or close canopy, pilot figures, yes or no. On the standard Hornet, you can have air brake up or down. On the Super Hornet, no. Super Hornet, there's no option there. But on the Hornet, there is. But I don't know. I have a soft spot for all these planes. I just like planes. And guns and spaceships and ships and cats and food. And I just like a lot of things, I suppose. What do you like? With that said, I guess I'll call it a night. Feel free to comment below. And I'll keep trying to think of other videos to post here and on the main Mishaco channel. With that, this is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.